Hi, it's Dr. Darnese, and welcome into the Reading Life with Dr. Darnese. And today I wanted to talk about one of my very favorite genres of books, which is books written by Black women. So we're doing some Black women's literature today, and of course, that's a massive topic, and we can have any number of people, but today I'm going to be talking about what do I have? One, two, three, four to bring to your attention. And so stay with me because if you love reading, if you love Black women's literature, if you love Harlem Renaissance, hang in. This is for you. Okay. Well, let me just start with, the Grand Dame, which is Toni Morrison. I mean, when we talk about Black women's literature, you cannot not talk about Toni Morrison. I mean, her body of work is extensive. This is beloved, obviously, winner of the Nobel Prize. And there she is. She has since passed on, but she is beloved herself. And it was one of the comments on the back of the book: national bestseller, Pulitzer Prize winner, a masterwork, wonderful. I can't imagine American literature without it. And, sometimes we get into this category of having to say, for example, Black women's literature instead of just women's literature or just American literature or just literature. But that is the way that we live in these United States, and things fall into certain categories. And so, if I had to say who is at the very top of Black women's literature, it would be Toni Morrison herself. Now, beloved, you could also watch the movie starring Oprah Winfrey, and I believe it was Danny Glover. But really, of course, the book is better because it was written by Toni Morrison. And it is about, I mean, at this late date, I say late date, this book came out originally in 1987. You probably know all about it. Is it a ghost story? People will say, Beloved is a ghost story. Well, it's a lot going on here. I'll just read the blurb. Staring unflinchingly into the abyss of slavery, this spellbinding novel transforms history into a story as powerful as Exodus and as intimate as a lullaby. Setha, its protagonist, was born a slave and escaped to Ohio, but 18 years later, she is still not free. She has too many memories of Sweet Home, the beautiful farm where so many hideous things happened, and Setha's new home is haunted by the ghost of her baby, who died nameless and whose tombstone is engraved with a single word, beloved. So there's a lot going on here. It brings to mind, the period of enslavement and the quest for freedom, what one is willing to do for freedom, um, what one is willing to do for love. What does it mean to love one's children unconditionally? There's so many layers to Beloved. I mean, I can hardly, it's already 3 minutes, so I'm just talking about Beloved. But if you haven't read it, I don't know what to say to you. There's a certain element of ghost story, of the supernatural, of magical realism. Some people will say it's a difficult read because there is this sort of magical realism where you don't necessarily know what's happening. It's not necessarily linear because there's a ghost involved. So, but it's not, intended to be scary like a horror movie kind of a thing. It's just sort of like reflecting upon and how real might your memories be. I'll say that. So we started with Toni Morrison, and now moving on to, um, gosh, I said Toni was at the top. I guess Toni's at the top. But now we're at Zora Neale Hurston. Their eyes were watching God. And this is hard for me because all the people I have today to talk about. This is just part one because I have so much Black women's literature. I mean, this is Black women's literature part one. And look, I have notes in here because, I'm a recovering academic, college professor, and these are notes from when I last taught the class. Taught the book in a class. I wonder what is the date on here. I probably don't have a date on here. Um, I don't have a date on here, but anyway, my notes from the last time I taught are on here. And so Zora Neale Hurston, one of the preeminent writers from the Harlem Renaissance era, this is her masterpiece, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Again, it was made into a movie starring Halle Berry. Michael Ealy, is that his name? Produced by Oprah. And I have to say, that movie was not really good. And I'm sorry to have to say it. I'm sorry to say the movie wasn't good because it's an Oprah production. And Halle Berry, like, how could you go wrong? But they just didn't do right by this book. They did not do right by this book. Anyway, you need to read this book if you haven't ever. The Eyes Were Watching God. Now, it was somewhat controversial in the Harlem Renaissance because, and I have notes in here. I don't know what, because it is written in Southern Black vernacular of the time of, the early 1900s. And so these were Southern folk, these were rural people. And so it is written in that vernacular. And so at the time during the Harlem Renaissance, that was one of the eras of where the new Negro emerging and the Black elite and the idea of the talented tenth, and that we should all be doing our utmost to present ourselves at the utmost, right? So says W.B. Du Bois, Alvin Locke, and a whole lot of other people who said that we should do all things to present ourselves in the best possible way. So the fact that Zora decided to write this in the Black vernacular, Southern vernacular, was a sticking point for people like Du Bois, people like Alan Locke, who was you could say, like the dean of the Harlem Renaissance, who, was kind of a gatekeeper in terms of whose work got put on, right? Like, basically you had to come through Alan Locke if you were going to be a successful artist during the Harlem Renaissance. He was the one who had the connections, and he was the one who would, put you on. And if he didn't like you, he might not put you on. But he did like this book, even though it was written in the vernacular. He thought there was a certain realism to it, and he did appreciate it, although he didn't necessarily like Zora that much. But anyway, um, what else can I say about it other than to read it? There is no more, there's no book more important to me than this one. And this is a quote I'm reading off the back from Alice Walker, who will certainly be in part two of this series. But there is no book more important to me than this one, says Alice Walker. And in fact, if it wasn't for Alice Walker, we would have really lost a lot of information about Zora Neale Hurston. Thank God that Alice Walker took it upon herself to reclaim Zora, and to because by the end of Zora's life, she had really fallen on hard times, and fallen out of favor as sort of as a writer, and her style and all of that. She ended up having a stroke in 1959, and she didn't have any money. She did not have any money. And I would always ask my students, I'll ask you, what would you do? Would you rather live a life of financial security, but you were not following your passion? You were just did a job because it paid you well, and it was good enough. Would you want that kind of life where you just have that kind of career? Or would you want a life where you could pursue your interests, your creativities, whatever you would love, right? Your own life of passion, but you weren't really making money, right? You were struggling, you were that starving artist. What would you do? Which would you choose? A life of financial stability and relative boredom, career frustration, or living your best creative life, but you don't have no money? And in the end, I'm reading the chronology that's at the back of this particular edition. It says October 1959, she was forced to enter the St. Lucie County Welfare Home. And by January of 1980, she died in that welfare home of hypertensive heart disease. And she was buried in an unmarked grave in the Garden of Heavenly Rest, Fort Pierce. And so it wasn't until 1973 that we even knew the cemetery where she was born. So that's Alice Walker took it upon herself to go and find Zora. Anyway, this is one of the best books that you could possibly read. I can't say enough. I can't even say enough. And then also from the Harlem Renaissance era is Nella Larson, my girl Nella Larson. And you may say, many people will say they have heard of Hurston, they've heard of Toni Morrison, of course, but they have not heard of Nella Larson. I'll show this one because it might come up better than that yellow cover there. So But I'll tell you how you probably know Nella Larson if you're into Black women's literature at all. It's from I guess Netflix did it, the film Quicksand about the two women who were passing. And well, really, one woman was passing and the other one passed for fun, right? They were both fair skinned and able to pass, and one made it her life. The other one just did it for fun because, or for convenience. Maybe fun is not the right word. She did it for convenience because, say that, as it's described in this book, that you're out on a very hot day walking through the city and you really just want to sit down somewhere and have a glass of iced tea or something to cool off. And only hotels or restaurants around there, they only serve white people. And, you're black, but you can pass for white, at least well enough to go in and get a cool drink. Would you do it? So that's what I mean by passing for convenience. You're not really trying to make a life of it, but when it comes up, you might do it. Um, anyway, quicksand and passing. So this particular um, mm, compilation, I guess I'll say, these are short. These are novellas. Quicksand and then passing. They're novellas, and so they're often put together in the same volume. So you might see it like this, and um, again, both stories are in here, Passing Quicksand and the story. So some other stories that Nella Larson wrote. And now Nella Larson is one of these really great writers who kind of took a back seat to others in the Harlem Renaissance era, like Zora Neale Hurston and a lot of the male writers who, pretty much take take all the spotlight, right? Like everybody knows Langston Hughes and Countee Cullen and, basically the men. And so the women writers of the era, they already kind of took a backseat. And again, referring to Alan Locke, he kind of was that way. He could be quite sexist and did not really put women in the forefront. And anyway, so this other story is called Passing. And I dare say, if you have not read Passing, it is, I like it better than Quicksand, to tell you the truth. And that may be an unpopular opinion. Again, here's a blurb from Alice Walker that says, Quicksand and Passing are novels I will never forget. They open up a whole world of experience and struggle that seemed to me, when I first read them years ago, absolutely absorbing, fascinating, and indispensable. And the thing about Passing is, or Quicksand, is it's also about passing. Um, it's also about passing, but it's really about identity. It's about a young biracial woman who was very fair skinned and she is trying to find herself. So it really is a story about finding oneself, living authentically, um, and being biracial and having this sort of liminal space of, am I black enough? Or I'm not black enough. I'm not white enough. And so where do I fit in life? And trying to find her way. And so she was struggling. So the main character there is Helga Crane in Passing. Helga Crane was struggling. She was on that struggle bus from jump. And, when I say, I mean, we meet her when she is teaching at a school. It's very, you got to put yourself back in the early 20th century, and think about what were the options for a young black woman, a young black professional woman. You'd be a teacher, you'd be a nurse, um, you'd be a maid, and Helga Crane is a teacher at a school that's very reminiscent of. Put you in the mindset of Tuskegee, and she's very unhappy with it. She's very unhappy with it, and she's trying to find her place in the world. Is what I'll say. She is trying to find her place in the world, and she is struggling greatly. And it's called quicksand because it seems like the decisions that she makes just kind of get her deeper and deeper and deeper into the struggle. And I mean, when I had my students read this, um, they were like, I'm sick of her. I said, I know, I'm sick of her too, but I love it so much. And this is how I would assign it. Y'all, I still have the notes in there. I don't know if you could see. So we would read it in two chunks, right? We read the whole book in a week because really it's not the whole book. It's a short story. So it's basically this much. This is quicksand, and then this is passing. So she gets on your nerves so bad. She'd be like, girl, get somewhere and sit down and make your life work because you are making very poor decisions. Helga Crane makes very poor decisions. But she's young and she is trying to find her place in life and she is dealing with the struggles of white supremacy and, also classism within Black communities, very much so about classism and, what's appropriate for, certain type of Black person or Black woman. And especially if you're considered light skinned and beautiful, what are you going to do with yourself? So, and this one is called Harlem Rhapsody. This is a new book actually. I think it just came out in 2025 or 2024, and I am not actually finished with it because I had to stop and read something else. It's a whole other story, which I'll explain. And so I had to pick up another book, which is about 800 pages, and I'm almost finished with that book. But I know the story because this is about Jessie Fawcett, another Harlem Renaissance um, creative, a writer, and she's more than that, right? She's a writer, she's an editor, she is W.E.B. Du Bois' right hand person. She is brilliant of her own accord. She has her run ins with Alan Locke because, again, Alan Locke, he's the first African American Rhodes Scholar, also went to Harvard. I mean, he has all the things. He is like a younger version of W.B. Du Bois, and he is quite arrogant about it and full of himself um, a lot of the time. I will do another video on Alan Locke because he's one of my favorite people too, although he has his issues. But the deal is that he is sort of trying to give Jessie Fawcett the blues, right? Like they're at odds. And, like as a historical fact, they're at odds. That's not what this book is about. This book is about Jessie Fawcett's contribution to um, the Harlem Renaissance itself, to the Black literature, the Black arts movement from that period, and therefore everybody since. Really, she did so much work, and mostly people don't know her name. Mostly people do not know the name Jessie Fawcett. And again, Alan Locke had a lot to do with that. Her relationship with W.E.B. Du Bois, which was quite complicated and personal. And were they having a relationship? Yes, they were. Were they having an affair? Yes, they were. But this book is full of. I mean, she's mentoring in this book. Jessie Fawcett is mentoring Nella Larson. She's mentoring Langston Hughes. So many of the artists whose names you do know, she's mentoring them. And in this book, you get a look at how she is doing that and um, how she's pouring herself into making a way for these younger artists whom we take for granted. And then we're hearing about her love affair with W.E.B. Du Bois. And it just. It just makes you scratch your head because all the pictures you've ever seen of Du Bois, right? You're like, he's not somebody who I would think is just such a hot, passionate somebody, right? But the way she writes about him, the author writes about him, and that how Jesse felt about him was a love. It's a love affair, right? And so we have to take it as that. Du Bois must have been all that, I guess. And frankly, Du Bois had many women over the years. He definitely was not faithful to his marriage. And so this book is by Victoria Christopher Murray, an African American writer. You probably know her. If you know her, recognize her name, Victoria Christopher Murray. She is the author of New York Times bestselling co-author of The Personal Librarian, which I will be on here talking about too because I love that book so much. Y'all, I had to start this channel. I have other YouTube channels. You might see my other channels too, but I love reading. I've always loved books. I was always that kid who wanted to go to the library in the summer. My grandmother used to have to take me to the library about every other week because I would finish my books and she'd be like, oh, we just went to the library. And I would say, no, Grandma, But I finished those books. When you're a little kid, they only allow you to have so many books out at one time. So she had to run me back to the library all the time. So I love books. I've been a professor for 20 years, and I'm only teaching part time now, and I prefer it that way. Academia is in shambles. But anyway, this is just part one of my African American or my Black women's literature series. I can't recommend any of these enough. And it's funny to me that I look in these and I find, at least in a couple of these, I find my teaching notes. I'm really wondering what I wrote. I'm gonna have to look. I'm gonna have to keep them just as a keepsake. Why not? It's what I was thinking of when I was standing in front of students, trying to help them make sense of why they should keep reading about uh, Helga Crane and how she just was making poor decisions. Anyway, let me know if you are familiar with any of those. Any of the works of Toni Morrison. I just mentioned Beloved here, but it's The Bluest Eye. And another work of hers that people don't talk about that much is called Jazz, or just Jazz. And Their Eyes Were Watching God, Zora Neale Hurston, any of Zora's other work, Nella Larson, Victoria Christopher Murray, or what you know or appreciate about the Harlem Renaissance. That's one of my favorite time periods. And yeah, well, I hope you will like, share, subscribe. Let's grow this channel. I would definitely appreciate it if you help me grow the channel. As you can see, we're just really getting started. Yeah, all that. So bye for now.